So you're sitting on a surplus of cash. Maybe you recently had an inheritance, or you sold a property, or you're just a saver and you have a surplus of cash sitting in your bank account. Well, today we're going to talk about cash, and I'm going to walk you through a sample scenario or a hypothetical scenario to show you different options for that cash, how that cash could potentially be hurting your taxes, and then also ways to potentially keep more of your growth when it comes to that cash that you have. So today we're going to walk through its Sue sample. Now, I'm going to kind of use a number here to really magnify this, but hopefully you can relate it to yourself no matter how much cash you might be sitting on. Right here, Sue sample, she's got $500,000 sitting in her savings account. So we're going to just say $500,000 of cash. Well, maybe you have $75,000 or $100,000. Maybe you have $1 million of cash. Either way, what we go through today, you're going to be able to utilize it and relate it to you and your situation. We're going to use Sue sample here and walk through kind of where she would be at. Let's just say, imagining she didn't have the cash. Then we're going to say where she would be at if she were to put the cash in interest-bearing accounts. And then we're going to look at a second option to say, hey, if she were to use this option, is she able to reduce her taxes and potentially keep more of her gains? Now, I think it's important as you look at this here to understand how money is taxed, especially in that first column. So back to Sue here. She's got $500,000 in her taxable column. That's how the IRS looks at it. $750,000 in her tax deferred. That's in her IRA. And then she's got $250,000 in her Roth. Now, some of you might be wondering, well, does she have mortgage interest and all these other things? We're going to keep it really simple today. Yes, she's got a residence, but she doesn't have a mortgage. That's all paid off. We'll go through her income when we kind of get into the tax projections, but it's really important to understand how the taxable column here, that first column of money, how it's taxed. It can be taxed in three different ways. Way number one is you can get taxed on interest. And if you're getting taxed on interest, you're going to get taxed at your ordinary income tax rates. You'll see that as we go through our hypothetical sample scenario today. The other ways that you can get taxed is you can get taxed on dividends and you could get taxed on recognized gains. So interest, dividends, and gains. The second two, though, the dividends, if they're qualified dividends, you'll get taxed at long-term capital gains rates. And gains, again, not interest. That's why I tried to use the word growth earlier, because we got to separate things here. You'll see this today. Gains get taxed depending on if you hold them more than 1 year. If you hold the security or the asset more than 1 year before you sell it, you're also looking at long-term capital gains rates. So keep that in mind as we go through our sample today and kind of walk through some different things to show you how investing your tax or putting your cash and putting it to work for you can impact you from a tax standpoint. Now, as I go into the tax projections here, I just remind you, speak with a qualified financial professional like us or a qualified tax professional in regards to your specific and unique scenario. So here we go. We're going to start utilizing some tax projection software so I can show you the differences in how Sue sample here, depending on how and where she puts her money, how she would get taxed, how much of the growth that she would keep based on some different scenarios. So our first column here is the base. We're going to call it our base column. This is just imagining that she didn't have any sort of, she actually didn't have the $500,000. Okay, so first column here, just imagine she didn't have that $500,000 in that taxable column. So I'm just going to show you where she's at from a base scenario. So Sue sample here, she's got $75,000 in pensions coming in. Again, made up numbers for today. You're just going to see the impacts of where she puts this money, but hopefully it's helpful for you. So she got $75,000 in pension coming in, $30,000 in Social Security because of the pensions. 85% of that Social Security is taxable. So there's our taxable amount of Social Security, $25,500. Again, just focusing on the first column here, and then we'll plug some numbers in. So total income, $100,500. She gets her standard deduction there, $16,550. Again, looking at 2024, all of this will change based on the year. So taxable income, $83,950, and her total tax, we should have just fast forwarded to this, is $13,522. So again, that's assuming she didn't have the $500,000, but she does, and she needs to put it to work for her. So what's the thoughts here? What are some options that she could do? So let's just say Sue Sample here, she takes that $500,000 and she said, boy, I see these online savings accounts and right now they're paying really good interest. I think I can get 4.5% interest in regards to my money. Sounds pretty good. So why don't I just go and put that money into the online savings account? So now Sue Sample puts the money into that online savings account. She's got 4.5% interest. Again, I'm not recommending or referring any specific products today in this show. It's just to show you kind of the difference from a tax aspect. So she uses an online savings account. She's getting some great interest, and it's giving her 4.5% on that $500,000. So that's $22,500 of interest. You're like, great. This is awesome. But does she get to keep all of that $22,500 of interest that she makes? And the answer is no. And as we had talked about earlier, because of taxes. That first column, guess what? You get taxed at your ordinary income rates on any taxable interest. So let's just fast forward to the bottom. Everything else here in this column stays the same. We're going to fast forward to the bottom here, and you'll see right here, total tax, our second column, where she's using the savings account that's paying her a nice high interest rate. Her taxes went up from $13,522 to $18,591. Now, she had $22,500 of growth in interest, but $5,069 of that is going to taxes. So she didn't get to keep it all. The difference there is her taxes went up $5,069. The only difference was the interest that came in. So if you think about it there, that $22,500 that she made in interest, she's only keeping $17,431 of it. The difference in taxes, so she had the gains in the interest, but her taxes went up. So the $22,500 minus how much her taxes went up because of that interest, which is the $5,069, means that she's keeping $17,431 of that interest. And you might look at that and be like, hey, that's great. She's still making money and the money's safe. And maybe that's part of her goals and that's part of your goals. And if so, then there you go. That's, now you understand how it's impacting your taxes. But maybe your goals are different. Maybe they're more longer term. Maybe you're looking at this cash and you're like, I don't need it in the next 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. So what can I do differently to help keep my taxes down, but still get the potential gains on that money? One quick thing too, before I move into the third option here, or the third column, the second option, you can see here by having that interest income coming in, it took Sue from the 22% bracket and bumped her up into the 24% bracket. So that taxable income also could potentially impact which tax bracket you sit in. So just something to keep in mind as you're kind of looking through and understanding your tax situation, your tax picture. Is putting this money in interest-bearing accounts going to maybe push you up into different tax brackets? Okay, with that, let's talk about a different option that Sue Sample here could use for that cash. Now, let's just say instead, Sue Sample decides to use equities. Maybe she puts it in a stock, or maybe she puts it in an ETF focused 100% on equities. And why do I say 100% on equities? Well, because if it's a mix, meaning there's some fixed income in there, well, fixed income will pay interest. If it's equities, then she's just potentially looking at two things: dividends, which I mentioned earlier, if they're qualified dividends, are taxed at a more favorable rate, your long-term capital gains rates, or she's looking at gains. And if she holds the equity longer than 1 year, well, then she's looking at long-term capital gains rates, which again is a more favorable rate than her ordinary income tax rate. And I'll show you that in a second. So let's just say Sue Sample here, she puts not all of it, right? She's like, wait a second, I still need some money in my savings account. I need some, call it safer money. And so I'm going to keep $50,000 in my savings account, but I'm going to use that online savings account because why not? It's going to pay me more interest. So right there, she's going to have $2,250 of interest still coming into her account. But now that she's shifted her thought process and she's using assets that are, again, producing dividends or gains, now she's got gains. So let's just say she's then put $450,000 into an ETF. Again, this is not promoting any specific products or anything like that. It's just to show you kind of the difference from a tax standpoint here. So let's say she decides to do that. Let's say the overall dividend yield of that ETF is 2% per year, so it's $9,000. And let's say most of those dividends are qualified dividends. So qualified dividends taxed at a more favorable rate. That's taxed at long-term capital gains rates versus your ordinary dividends, which are taxed at your ordinary income tax rates. So 2%, we're going to say a majority of them here are qualified. So again, getting taxed at that more favorable rate. So let's take a look here. Let's keep scrolling down. Everything else is the same. And you might be thinking, well, wait a second. What about the rest of the money? Well, now that Sue's taking a different approach and she's investing this into an asset or a security, she doesn't necessarily need to sell it or be exchanging it all the time. Hopefully she's taking a more longer approach here, and we're going to say Sue is not selling it, not doing anything within at least the first year of holding this security. So all of that is sitting somewhere, right, in this asset for hopefully gains over a period of time. And so back to our projection here, we're going to just keep going down. Everything's the same. Pension's the same. Social Security's the same because she's not selling it. There's no capital gains. Nothing's being bought or sold. Nothing else going on in her system here. So we just scroll down to the bottom. Now take a look at the tax difference here. Now we're in our third column because she had a little bit of interest, that $2,250 from the money she kept in the bank, but the rest, since she's shifted it into an ETF in our example here, now she's just looking at taxes on the dividends. So again, the base was $13,522. She still has some taxes she's paying because of those dividends and because of that small interest. But you can see here the taxes are less than if she would have put all of the money in the online savings account. So now she's at $15,399 in taxes. And you might be thinking, well, that's great, but what if she needs or wants some of that money? What if she does have gains in that account and she decides to sell a portion of that account in the future to recognize some of those gains and take those into her, take those in just like she would have got the interest in that second column there. Well, let me just kind of show you the difference of how she would get taxed. So if you focus here in the kind of the bottom area here, in our third column, in the kind of the bottom numbers here, it says effective tax on next $1,000 of ordinary income. Ordinary income would be that interest or short-term gains. But if Sue held that security for more than 1 year, now we're looking at capital gains. So effective tax on next $1,000 of capital gains. You see, in that middle column, right here, in that middle column, she's going to be getting taxed on 24%. That interest gets taxed at 24% each and every year she makes interest. Over here, though, in that third column, now she's just selling when she needs money. And if she's held it for more than 1 year, so she's looking at long-term capital gains, guess what? She also just saved herself money in taxes right there, because that's the gains, just the gains, will get taxed at 15% versus 24%. Also, I want you to kind of look across the screen here of how, what she did here, how that's impacted which tax bracket she's in. So the base scenario, meaning she didn't have the $500,000, she was in the 22% bracket. She put all of that to work for, all that $500,000 to work for her in an interest-bearing account, jumped her up to the 24% bracket. But if she put it to work for, again, in something just focused on dividends and gains, it kept her in the 22% bracket. So hopefully you can just kind of see there, having cash, great thing. And you're probably looking at it going, wow, this is a lot of money that I have. And sometimes when people feel like they have that cash, they just want to keep it, safe. And that's a relative term. It all depends on your plan. And so, but you also have to understand is how could it potentially be impacting your taxes? And you might be looking at that account going, man, this is great. I'm getting a lot of interest, but is that actually costing you more in taxes? Are you actually paying more of your gains? I'm going to say more of your growth away in taxes than you would be if you were to take a different approach. Would you be able to potentially keep more of your growth over a longer period of time? So a few things just to kind of keep an eye on. One is, will this interest put you in a new tax bracket? The other thing is you have to look at is IRMA as well. Is having all of this interest coming in going to potentially throw you past an IRMA level where now you're going to be paying increased premiums on your Medicare? So what are some things to kind of think about here? One of the things you might be thinking is, well, I'm hearing you, Scott, but so you're telling me I should be putting all of my cash in stocks? That seems really risky. No, I'm not telling you that either. As I mentioned in that third column, she kept an amount safer for her. But let's just say in your plan, you're like, hey, I need an amount though that's safe, that's at lower risk for my overall plan. Well, it may still help you to take and put some of that cash to work for you in equities or something that's going to produce dividends and long-term capital gains, and then take a different account. Like for Sue here, she could go into her IRA and reduce the risk in her IRA. So when we look at the total pot, right, she's still balanced out the same. It's just where she's putting the risk in her overall system. The other thing I think that you have to ask yourself is, what do you need the money for, and when do you need the money? If it's something short term that you're going to be paying for within the next year or 2 years, well, yeah, having it in cash is probably a good idea, because if you have it at risk, it could potentially go down. But maybe you don't need this money for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years. Well, then you might want to take a more tax efficient approach when it comes to that money. So hopefully today's sample scenario helped you kind of look at your surplus cash in a whole different light, and maybe think about things a little bit differently when it comes to that cash, as there are ways to help reduce the taxes that you'll pay and keep more of your future growth in your pocket versus giving it to the IRS. So, hey, if you found this video to be of value and benefit, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're coming out with new videos each and every week about ways to reduce the taxes on your IRAs and 401ks, talking about retirement, talking about Social Security, and many more topics just like those. So subscribe, that way you'll get notified as new videos come out. Thanks, and have a great day.